Most are afraid of unknown depths, skirting shores thinking world flat. I'm with the island girls in celebration of new religion. Nobody led me or said this way. I sailed alone on makeshift raft with wind as companion. Fate for deliverance, confidence enough to assess new disposition. Seekers of lost paradise may seem fools to those who never sought the other worlds. Welcome to Momentary Zen with Zen Garcia. Visit www.fallenangels.tv. You're listening to Revolution Radio.
The Grand Highway is crowded with lovers and searchers and leavers, so eager to please and forget. My friends and I come from far Arden with words dangled like jewels for your careless pleasure, laboring for your liberty and singing secrets freely to those whom would lend ear. Beware of ciphers dressed in partial truth, decorated in luxuriance and sold for profit as candy to the masses. Sharing truth is sacred duty, obligation we should assume without expectation of tribute or reward. We must give without restriction, goading others to remembrance, in seeking catalysts to their own souls' awakening. I whisper to them who would attend, this way to paradise those of you seeking, willing to digress, compliant to sacrifice self on the altar of truth, even at the expense of this world. Welcome, friends. I'm your host, Zen Garcia, and thank all of you for the birthday wishes. I really appreciate your patronage and the fellowship that all of us have been able to come together and share over the past few years. It's been quite a while now that I've been part of the family here at Revolution Radio, and I consider it to have been a grand journey, and I've learned a lot of things since being part of the regiment of all the various hosts that are allowed and given privilege, opportunity to be part of the membership of the crew that are allowed to speak on and talk about and cover all the things that we do in all the different ways. Thank you, Shannon, and I will click that link here a short bit. And thank you, Count, Sky, and Long Shadow, Cindo, Hal, Herbal Fluzz, Juno, Tremor, DARPA, all of Monkey, Link, all of you that are in the chat room. We have a full house this evening, and it's always a pleasure to be able to share with you in the way that I do, covering all the different things that I do cover. And this evening I'm going to speak about a couple of things, cover a few current events before going on to discuss in detail a particular aspect of the book that I'm currently working on and writing, which I am, well, it seems like I'm really close, and I feel really close to being able to get it out and release it to public. And I'm going through the final edit now. I'm not going to release title on it yet, because that will be a dead giveaway on what it is I will be speaking about and the connections that I will be sharing within it that are huge revelations, in my opinion. And the the things that I learned and which led me to write this particular book, um, they were so profound and so impacting on my life that I decided to stop and to temporarily abandon the projects I had currently been endeavoring to complete. And I was close, at that time, close to finishing a book on the war in heaven, as well as a book on a poetry book on my observations of the esoteric aspects of world and connections to the ancient mysteries, biblical prophecy, and New World Order. And so I decided to stop because I felt like this information that I was just recently had discovered was so critical that I had to get it out in book form and on paper before anybody else had chance to discover and do and to endeavor the same way as I had to put it into book form. And so I'm getting close. Thank you, Cortec. I appreciate that, brother. I appreciate all of you. I consider you all to be really good friends. Hello, Pale Rider. And really looking forward to releasing this text. And then at that point, I will begin to discuss it because there is a lot of information in connection to it that I want to share and release with you. So much information, in fact, that that really I think it will be able to fill up, I don't know, 60 hours of broadcasts, videos, and so I'll get to that at some point very soon. And hello, Doc. Good to see you, brother. All right, so I want to open with an interesting article that was sent to me by a friend of mine. And the title of the article is, "Did an Ancient Civilization Drive Tanks Across Turkey 14 million years ago?" And so, if you have not heard about this, let me actually check out the email that was sent to me so I can send you the link so that if you're interested in looking this up or reading it for yourself, that you can then do so. I get so much mail, it's crazy. It can't be more than a couple days old though. And another thing too, I do try to, answer all of the emails that you send me. It might take me just a little while, but I do try to do that. And so if any of you have any questions that you like to ask me about in any way, just contact me at my author website, zengarcia.com. You can click the contact button there. Okay, I found it. This was released on the Daily Mail. Let me post this in the chat room. And certainly you can ask me about anything. I don't claim to know everything, of course, but I will try to get answer, even if I'm not aware of what it is that you're asking me about. I'll do some research to look it up so that I can get a better idea, and then I will answer you on that. And I've got a couple questions that I'm going to be answering as well too. I have to remember where those questions that come from, I believe they're from Facebook. So I'll get to those as well here in just a few minutes. But I want to open with this article. It's very interesting, I think. All right, so this academic thinks so is the opening, so we'll get into this. Geologist Dr. Alexander Koltepin believes mysterious markings in the Phrygian Valley of central Turkey were made by an intelligent race. He said rocky fields recovered with the ruts left some millions of years ago. We are not talking about human beings. We are dealing with some kind of car or all-terrain vehicle. A Russian academic has claimed that an ancient civilization drove giant all-terrain vehicles across Earth millions of years ago, and that the tracks are still visible today. Geologist Dr. Alexander Kolpin believes that mysterious groove-like markings in the Phrygian Valley of central Turkey were made by an intelligent race between 12 and 14 million years ago. We can suppose that ancient vehicles on wheels were drove on soft soil, maybe a wet surface, he said. Also, the article gives you images as well as links to a video. Joyriding little green men, question mark. Dr. Alexander Kolpin believes that groove-like markings in... it's repeating. Hold on. Such cases are well known to geologists. For example, the footprints of dinosaurs were naturally preserved in a similar way. Dr. Kolpin, the director of Natural Science Scientific Research Center at Moscow's International Independent Ecological Political University, has just returned from a field trip to the site in Anatolia with 3 colleagues. Fisgia, located in central Turkey, came to prominence in the 8th century BC. The Phrygians were a civilization in ancient Turkey that came to... For some reason, this thing keeps repeating. Their capital city was Gordium, which is the site of present-day city Yasaliska or something like that, about 43 miles southwest of Ankara. The Phrygians had a functioning state described in 200 inscriptions found throughout their kingdom in Anatolia. King Midas is the most famous king of the Phrygians, described in both Greek and Assyrian sources. After his defeat in battle by the Cimmerians, it is said that he committed suicide by drinking bull's blood. Ancient track marks carved into the bedrock on the Phrygian Valley have long baffled archaeologists with explanations as to their origin, ranging from Phrygian carts to speculation about ancient alien vehicles. Clues to an ancient civilization. We can suppose, we can suppose that ancient vehicles on wheels drove on soft soil, maybe wet surface, said the doctor. There's a lot of different pictures of these particular tracks, but this also reminds me of some tracks that were found in Malta, which people believe to have been tracks for a huge machine which utilized those grooves that moved upon and through those grooves, and that this machine was used to cut megalithic sized stone from these various quarries. All right, just a little bit more. All these rocky fields were covered with the ruts left some millions of years ago. We are not talking about human beings. We are dealing with some kind of cars or all-terrain vehicles. He described the markings as petrified tracking ruts in rocky, tuftatious volcanic ash deposits. Just a couple more sentences here, and then I'll stop, because you get the idea. According to his observations, the view of the ruts leaves no doubt that they are ancient. In some places, the surface suffered from weathering cracks, as seen here. The age of the ruts is between 12 and 14 million years old, he believes. The methodology of specifying the age of volcano rocks is very well studied and worked out. He also claims that archaeologists avoid touching this matter because it will ruin all their classic theories. He said, I think we are seeing the signs of the civilization which existed before the classic creation of this world. Maybe the creatures of that pre-civilization were not like modern human beings. He claimed the ancient car tracks are one of a number of clues which prove the existence of ancient civilizations, but which are often ignored by mainstream scientists. All right, I'm going to stop there. There was I think maybe half a year ago that I read an article about an ancient wall that was discovered in Russia, and this wall was made of stones, megalithic stones that were larger than those that were found at Baalbek in Lebanon. For those that don't know or are not familiar with Baalbek, that's where the largest stones, up to 250 tons, some of these individual stones, and these stones had to have been lifted and moved because they are placed in an ancient walled structure on top of other megalithic stones, but those that are of a smaller size than these huge megalithic stones. And according to the technology that we have today, it would take 12 to 18 cranes, all situated in a circle around just one of these stones, to be able to even lift it. And they, even if they were able to lift it, they would not be able to maneuver it in any manner because, all of the cranes surrounding it, they would get in the way of each other if they were to try to maneuver it in any direction other than just straight up. And so we know that there was some kind of technology, or that because we know that there was a race of giants that had been here upon the earth, that either the giants were of very large stature and had incredible strength, or there was some technology that allowed the reversal of gravity in some way, as far as the downward pressure of the mass, the weight of these stones, that they were able to be made weightless or light so that they could be maneuvered. And that the Farsight Institute, when they did the remote viewing, and if you don't know what the Farsight Institute is, it's a group of ex-military remote viewers that come together and do blind they do blind studies where a couple of remote viewers will be given a task, not even told what it is, not even given any kind of an idea where to place their focus. They're just told that here you have a task, go remote view it, let us know what you think, what your impressions are. Here, do some illustrations, some drawings, and then send us your results. And then these, these two individual remote viewers, not having been told what the study is about or what the, what they're supposed to be focused on, they will gain impressions from their remote viewing skill, and then draw up illustrations and write up a summary of what they thought, how they felt about whatever it was that they were supposed to be working on, and then they would send that to the one that had tasked them with that particular project. And then the evidence is compiled. The then they're told afterwards what it was that they were actually what the study was about, and then it's put together in video form. Well, anyways, the reason I mention this is because two of them were tasked with viewing the Great Pyramid and trying to discover how it was that they were created, as well as who the overseers of that project, who were the overseers of those projects. And so they did this, and what the project coordinator compiled and released as evidence that they created a video of the results. They basically said that the overseers were these praying mantis looking like beings, like reptilian feathered serpent like beings, and that they oversaw a pre-Adamic race that were treated as slaves, and which resembled to them the cloning, that they were all the same, that they had all been cloned, and that they were used as the slave labor to put together these megalithic projects, and that that also there was technology involved with the creation of the pyramids, where the overseers were able to utilize some kind of tractor beam or some kind of electromagnetic force that was in some way connected to the ley lines, to these lines that had this energetic field, and that they were able to utilize this energy to lift and push as if they were, floating on air. And in that way, they were able to maneuver all of these megalithic blocks into place. And so those two things, when it comes to these huge megalithic sized blocks, it's either they were put into place by a huge, like a group of giants that had to have been of huge stature and had incredible, almost supernatural strength. And that if it was not done in that way, then it would have to have occurred in the manner that the remote viewers, saw for the pyramid project, which is an interesting thing. And so I will, when we come back from break, I'm going to start talking about some of these other things. I'll take a look at it at some point, Pale Rider, and get back to you when I can actually give it some consideration. It's 11 pages, so I'll not be able to go over it during the next break. And so this whole, as far as this particular story, um, was there some ancient race that predated modern humanity? Absolutely. I know there was, because this is even mentioned within the scriptures, the talk about the rebel angels being cast out. And I know I covered this in 2 shows. I talked about this here on this radio network, speaking about the 2 incursions of the both the rebel angels and the fallen watchers. But I still received questions about this particular topic from individuals. So this past Saturday, I did another show called uh, Rebel Angels Fall from Grace, and I'll post a link in the chat room to that particular show, because I answered a few questions that were asked about these 2 incursions. And I also read, because I don't read a lot of scripture on this particular show, but I did read in that show specific passages to kind of better explain these 2 events and how it ties together with ancient history and mythology, and how it also relates to the book of Enoch, the discussion of the fall of the watchers, those that left their place of habitation, their first estate. We'll be right back. Okay, welcome back, everybody. And so I want to answer these couple of questions, and then I'll go into what I wanted to mainly focus on in this particular show, which has to do with how the 7 holy feast days and festivals, which are laid out in Leviticus chapter 23, how they correlate to the coming of Christ, both his first incarnation in the flesh as well as his eventual return, which this is a very important aspect of my newest book. And it's a study that, though it's covered by several people in part, it's not covered in full, at least not in the way that I do so within this particular new book. But I'm going to speak a little bit about that this evening just to give you an idea of what that work is about. But first, these couple of questions, because they are connected to what I was talking about. Oh, and also Pale Rider put a link in the chat room, and I believe this is the release of the video that I saw from the Far Side Institute that details what I was talking about in the first part of the show. They only had released like 5-10 minutes of it, just a highlight video, and they were requiring people to pay $15 at that time in order to gain access to a link which allowed you to download the video and watch it in full. But it seems like if this is the same video that I saw, which, I didn't watch it or anything, but if it is, it will go through all of what I talked about and shared in the first segment. And it's it's worthwhile watch. So I would, especially now that it's free, you should definitely check it out. And so, Pale Rider, if you would, post that link in the chat room once more. All right. The questions, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but basically the question, 2 of the questions from Marlin have to do with how the watchers, how they were able to mate with the daughters of Cain. And how it was that they had bodies of flesh, or whether all angels are able to mate with flesh and blood human women, or was it just these particular angels? And so I'm going to answer that question first, and I'll get to his next one. As far as the specifics on the watchers, the 200 watchers led by Samyaza and Azazel, and how it was that they were able to mate with the daughters of Cain, which is, there's a great description of all of this in chapter 100 of the book Kebra Nagast, Kebra, separate word Nagast. It's a book, an Ethiopic holy book. Kebra Nagast means the glory of kings, and it's the foremost holy book of the Ethiopic people. And in chapter 100 of this book, it details how the watchers, the fallen watchers, how they were holy angels before they fell, and they were servants to Yeshua, the Son of God, in the seventh heaven. And they were jealous of his love for Adam, and being jealous of Adam when he and Eve ate of the forbidden fruit in paradise, which resulted in their being cast out to the earth, being exiled from paradise, and then transformed into flesh, where where Eve then got was impregnated with Cain, the firstborn son of the devil, as well as that they lost their bright nature, wanting to be as gods themselves. And so these watchers, being jealous of Adam, they told Yeshua that if he gave them a chance to come to the earth, that they would serve him, and they would make humanity aware of his majesty, as well as how to be servants to each other, so that they could aspire to be counted as worthy of the kingdom. And being placed into flesh and then sent to the earth, they immediately lusted after the daughters of Cain, after seeing them basically having a huge party wherein they were engaging in an orgy, is basically what it was, where they were engaging in the lusts of the flesh. They were, the tambourines, flutes, music, engaged in dancing. They had scented themselves and beautified themselves with makeup. And the angels, the watchers, when they left their high holy place, the place of habitation, their first estate, and they saw the daughters of Cain, they were just raging. Their lust to get engaged with these particular women was so great that they all decided to make a pact to commit this great sin. And they knew that they were going to commit this great sin, and yet they did it anyways. And they also knew that in doing what they were about to do, that they could lose the favor of the Most High, and they could be condemned, judged accordingly for it. But their lust was so great that they did it anyways. They took wives of all which they chose, and again, being in flesh bodies, they were able to mate with them, but because they were, spiritual beings in flesh bodies, still being angelic, the children that they had were hybrid, and that they were, these men of renown. They created a race of giants. And these giants were not born naturally. It says in the text in the Keber Nagas that they came up through the navels, that they split their mothers wide open um, as they, you know, came out of them, and that many of them died, and that they were not born in natural means. And so, it's my opinion that the angels that are not put into flesh bodies, that they need flesh bodies in order to engage in um, sexual activity, much like how the angels that possess the elites, the royals that give themselves over for such possession, they utilize their bodies in order to indulge in the physical aspects of this dimension and this world. That's how they do it. But that regular, just regular angels, that unless they take human flesh form, that they cannot engage in such activity. Now, whether they can, take on form and condense themselves to where they are human flesh, or they have to possess bodies, that's a whole nother thing. And none of us really know that, whether that makes a difference or not, because it also says in some of the ancient texts that the angels, that the rebel angels, that they did this. They condensed themselves, they took on physical form, but that after a while they were not able to go back, and that they eventually got trapped. They got caught up in flesh. And so, does that have anything to do? Even Edgar Casey in the book on Atlantis, where he describes the all of these different individuals, their supposed past lives in connection to this time and era, he describes these rebel angels as having been trapped in that manner, that they eventually got locked into flesh and weren't able to escape from the physical dimensions. Okay, and so a Pell Rider asks, wasn't an actual inscription found on the or near Mount Hermon referencing the oath that the fallen angels swore? I'm not sure about that. I would be interested if you have a link, though, to a particular story or video. I would be interested in, if there was some kind of inscription which highlighted the pact that they made together. That would truly be interesting. But yes, it was on Mount Hermon that they came down, which I believe it's in Turkey or Syria, somewhere in the Middle Eastern area. All right. The other question from Marlon, then I'll get to the last question that was asked is in connection to what I'm going to be talking about anyways, as far as these 7 holy holy days, the feast days. This question says, do you know which writings were the first to identify the initial appearance and or origin of demons? What I understand so far is that the Rephaim, the giants, did not contain with them souls or spirits created by Abba the Father, and thus upon them perishing, their soul spirit was left to wander the earth. Is that the origin of dark spirits and or demons? And according to the book of Enoch, that is absolutely where we get some, because not all, but that where we get some of the demonic entities, these ghost-like apparitions, specters, dark shadow beings, that they come from the souls, the spirits of these Rephaim that were killed in the flood of Noah's deluge. And that it says in 2nd Baruch that there were 409,000 of these giants which perished in this manner, and perishing in this manner, they, because they have no part in salvation, that they then became demonic entities which ravage and rage for the things that they had while they were in the flesh here upon the earth. And that these beings, enter into and possess and take over people's bodies, especially those that open themselves to such possession, perhaps, doing black magic ritual or trying to contact the dead or whatever. There's a number of different ways which, a person can open themselves to such contact and such possession. That indeed was one of the, that these beings having no part in salvation and not being natural beings which, could inherit eternal life and have grace, salvation after death, that they became these demonic entities. And that also the rebel angels initially that came here, they are demonic entities anyways, because they are these interdimensional beings, and that they, before they got locked into flesh, or before they found flesh bodies to possess, to work through, that they were the demon spirits. They were the demonic horde, legion, as it mentions in the New Testament, that these beings were those that had haunted and terrorized humanity prior to the coming of the Rephaim, and prior to their death. These demonic entities had preceded the Rephaim. And so that covers that particular. When we come back from the next break, I'll answer the next question, because it has to do with some of the feast days that I'm going to mention. But let me just go ahead and discuss this, because this next study and what I'll cover in the next hour is a very interesting study. And it's one that also, when you look into the details of it, it helps you to understand that Yeshua's coming and incarnation in the flesh was no accident, and that he was not just another ascended master or another human being or even a special teacher, but that he was in fact the Son of God, and that there was special reason for his coming at the time that he did, and that even his death, his crucifixion, his death, his entombment, and his resurrection, as well as the 3 days which he was away from his body. All of those things are important aspects and are prophetic in nature, in that they align with these particular festivals. And if you're not familiar with the Leviticus chapter 23, 7 holy days that are laid out by Yahweh Elohim, the 7 festivals that I'm speaking about are Passover, unleavened bread, the Feast of First Fruits, the Feast of Weeks, the Feast of Trumpets, the Day of Atonement, and the Feast of Tabernacles. And when we come back from break, I'll explain what all of these feasts and festivals are in connection with, as far as the historical events that occurred during the um, during the early history of the Israelites people, the ancient Hebrews, which led to these feast days. As far as they're being mandated in Leviticus for as a memorial and for commemoration of some significant event, that these 7 feast days are they align in a very profound manner with the life, the ministry, and the death, resurrection of Yeshua as the Son of God. And we've got just a couple minutes, so let me go ahead and use this time to mention, though, that that Revolution Radio really could use the support of all the listeners out there. Those of you that can spare even $5, $10, it doesn't, whatever you can give unto the station. That we do need the listener support in order to maintain our freedom from corporate sponsor and maintain integrity in such way that allows us to talk about and cover, issues that other stations are not or won't discuss, because they're controlled from the top down by whatever secretive Illuminati organization or individual, Freemasonic individual that owns the particular stations and the airwaves, and can utilize his own bias, her own bias, to keep people from talking about certain things. All right, we'll be right back. All right, welcome back, everybody, for a second hour. I just wanted to reiterate that there are various different levels of support items that are being offered through the radio network at freedomslips.com, which will barter for your support. And so if you don't want to just donate straight up, you can purchase any of these items, and that this will go a long way to keeping us on the air and allowing us to grow. And we're hoping, still endeavoring, trying to go 24/7 on satellite so that we can reach even greater populations and numbers of people and bring this information to more and more, so that more can learn about and understand and know about the esoteric aspects of what we are dealing with as world. All right, so I'm going to answer this question because this is also in connection to what I was talking about. This question is from Yaakov Lokum, and the question that he asks she asked, sorry, is I would like to know your opinion on the lunar Sabbath and how to apply it to the counting of the Omer. All right, for those that don't know what the counting of the Omer is, it has to do with the Feast of Pentecost. And the Feast of Pentecost is counted, it's a 49-day festival where seven of the main agricultural crops that are grown in Israel, that are native to Israel, they are brought to the temple as sacrifice in order to honor the bounty that Yahweh had given to the Israelites. In the spring harvest, the winter crops that are coming to harvest in the springtime. And the Omer refers to, it's the barley crop. An Omer is, a particular bundle of barley, which is the first crop to ripen during the spring feast, the spring festival. Well, actually, this is Pentecost is in summer, but it's counted from the day of first fruits, which is the third feast, the third festival. And so he's asking how the lunar Sabbath applies to the counting of this Omer. And so those of you that don't know, according to God's calendar, as I explained in the shows that I did with Chris Tyerman, God's calendar is based on 12 lunar months, and each of the months alternate between 29 and 30 days. And the reason that the lunar months are calculated this way is because a synodic month, what's called a lunation, averages 29.53 days. And so the way that God's calendar stays in harmony with this period, this synodic month, is by alternating 29 days one month, 30 days the next month, 29 days the next month, 30 days the next month. And in this way, it stays in alignment with the phases of the moon. And so there's no month that has more than 30 days, because there's no period, no cycle where the moon takes more than 30 days to go through its four phases. And because the months on God's calendar are aligned with the phases of the moon, Sabbath is every first, the new moon day, and every 8th, every 15th, every 22nd, and every 29th. And so the three festivals, the first three spring feasts, are called Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and then the third one is the Day of First Fruits. And that's when the counting of the Omer, the temple, the people, the Israelites, bring this tribute to the temple in order to be sacrificed. But the actual public wave offering doesn't occur until the 17th of Nisan. And for those that don't know, Nisan is equivalent to the English month of March. And I'll explain how these three festivals also align with the first coming of Christ. But in order to answer Yaakov's question, you have to know that the 15th, every 15th, according to the God's lunar calendar, is a Sabbath. And according to Leviticus, it's the morrow after Sabbath that the wave offering, this public display where the priest offers as sacrifice these particular products, these agricultural products that are brought. And in this case, it's the barley, the omer, which is, a bundle of this barley. It's offered on the 17th of Nisan, because the Passover occurs on the 14th of Nisan, and the Feast of Unleavened Bread occurs on the 15th of Nisan, which is a Sabbath. And then the 16th of Nisan is when the festival of first fruits begins. But the wave offering, again, as I said, occurs on the 17th of Nisan. And so here's how to understand how these festivals align with Yeshua's coming into the flesh. And this is a very profound and huge revelation. All right. For those that don't know what each one of these different festivals are, Passover is referred to in Hebrew as Pesach, Pesach. And the reason that the Most High, Yahweh, has the Israelites celebrating Passover, if you don't understand the story, is the Passover is linked to the 10th plague that was brought upon the Egyptians, which the angel of death on the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the 15th Nisan, on the Sabbath, while the Israelites were eating the sacrificial lamb, eating the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the angel of death came into the land and killed all the firstborn of the Egyptian. And on Passover, the 14th of Nisan, before the Feast of Unleavened Bread on the 15th, also you have to know that that the way that God's calendar marks the day is from evening, the night, from sunset to sunset the next day. Not like how we keep track of days from midnight to midnight the same day. It's not like that. The tracking of the day according to God's calendar aligns with the way that it is discussed in the first creation week in Genesis chapter 1. It talks about each one of these days as being the evening and then the morning, and that was, one day. And so on the 14th of Nisan, before sunset, the sacrificial lamb was to be slaughtered, and the blood was to be put on the doorpost and above the doorpost, and this would be a sign to the angel of death to not touch any of the inhabitants of this particular dwelling. And so it was in that way that the Israelites were spared the wrath, the judgment, the murder of their children that took place as a judgment against the Egyptian people in order to entice Pharaoh to release the Israelites from the bondage of Egypt, because they had been 400 years enslaved and as indentured servants there ever since Joseph. Joseph, who his brothers locked him up. He became the king in Egypt, and he deciphered Pharaoh's dream. And for 7 years, he saved all the crops, and then there would be 7 years of drought and starvation, and all of the other nations and people came to him for grain. And his brothers and his father moved there to Goshen in surrounding Egypt, and then the Israelites lived among the Egyptians. But after the death of that particular Pharaoh, I forget who it was, but anyways, after the death of that Pharaoh, Ramses, the next Pharaoh, started to oppress the Hebrew Israelites. And then from that point on, it became really bad until Moses, was brought up, led to lead the Hebrew Israelites out of Egypt. And so on the 15th day, it was before sunset that the sacrificial lamb was slaughtered, blood put on the doorpost. During the 15th of Nisan, which is a Sabbath, they ate the sacrificial lamb and enjoyed the feast of unleavened bread. It was during that day, during that Sabbath, that the slaughter of the firstborn of the Egyptians occurred. On the very next day is the day of first fruits, the festival of first fruits. And it's on that day that, they bring all of the offerings to the temple in order to be offered by the priest. And the first public wave offering occurs on the 17th of Nisan. Now, here's how this aligns with the life, the ministry, the death, the burial, and the resurrection of Christ, which is a fascinating study, as I mentioned earlier. And all of this is in great detail in my newest book. Yeshua was put on the cross and died about 3 p.m. on the 14th of Nisan, which is Passover. And so before sunset, he was taken down off of the cross and get his body given over to Nicodemus. Nicodemus, as one of the Pharisee priests, he wrapped his body, and then Yeshua was entombed in the tomb of his uncle Joseph of Arimathea. Well, and so Yeshua dying on the cross, when he went to John to be baptized, John said, "Behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world." And he was referring to Yeshua being the sacrificial lamb that died on the cross, and that he was just like the Passover when they slaughtered the sacrificial lamb without spot or blemish, that this lamb was then eaten during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and so Yeshua was this sacrificial lamb. And how it lines up with his life is that he was killed, he was murdered, crucified, and died on Passover as the sacrificial lamb. He was entombed and placed in the burial tomb of his uncle Joseph of Arimathea on the 15th, which is, again, the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So his life fulfilled those two. Now, if you count from the 14th of Nisan, you count 3 days, beginning with sunset that evening. You get the 14th from sunset to sunset the next day. The 15th is 1 day. From sunset the 15th to sunset the 16th is the second day. From sunset the 16th to almost sunset the 17th is 3 days. And it was on that third day that he came back to his body for what Christians call the resurrection. But what people don't understand about the time that he was away from his body is that according to the story of the Gospel of Nicodemus, the second part, it's called the descent into hell. And it was during this time that Yeshua went down. I'll get to that in just a second, Pale Rider. That's foolishness. Whoever thinks that is deluded. Anyways, let me explain this first. And so Yeshua died on the cross on the 14th. Again, he was resurrected right before sunset on the 17th. And the reason this is important is because, well, let me explain the descent into hell first. The 3 days that he was away from his body, he went down into Sheol, and he freed the patriarchs and the mothers of the Hebrew people that were being held in Sheol, from Adam to the last person that died right before he and the thief on the cross died. They were all bound in Sheol. And when he left his body, when he died and was separated from his body, he went down into Sheol and he freed all of these people. He took them, this is called the first resurrection. He took them up into paradise at the third heaven, gave them over to Michael, the archangel. Michael baptized them in the Arturian lake and then allowed them to enter into the city of God for, New Jerusalem, which is there. It's the place of the righteous in the third heaven. And why this is significant is because just as his father, Yahweh Elohim, had freed the Egyptians on that day and during that time from the bondage of Egypt, where they were slaves under the oppression of Pharaoh, so did Yeshua go down into Sheol and free the patriarchs and the mothers, the Hebrew people, those that were the righteous, freed them from the tyranny of the demons of hell and of Satan, and also the angel of Tartarus, the keeper of souls for Sheol. He freed them from that bondage and emptied out hell, and took all of these people and took them just as Yahweh had took them into the wilderness to their freedom. He took them back into paradise and delivered them to their freedom. And so you see the how both events correlate with one another. All right, the next thing, Yeshua as the first fruits of the resurrected dead. He, after giving over the people to Michael so that they could be baptized, entered into the city of God, he went before the Most High God, the Father, and offered himself as the first fruits, and he also performed as the high priest. He performed the feast, the festival of first fruits, the wave offering that occurs on the 17th of Nisan. And so Yeshua was both high priest and the first fruit offering. And so he fulfilled his life and his death and his resurrection, fulfilled and aligns with those three particular sacred festivals and feast days, these three holy days. And also the Feast of Pentecost. As I said, it's measured 50 days. It is exactly 50 days from the day of first fruits, which is the 16th of Nisan. And so there's 7 Sabbaths which occur from that time, which if you count it out, the 15th is a Sabbath. you have 6 days, and then the next Sabbath. And so you have 7 Sabbaths, and then you have one more day, and that is the day of Pentecost. Well, for those that don't know, the festival, the Feast of Pentecost, is celebrated because it was on that day that Moses was given the Torah, given the law, the Old Testament, given the law on Mount Sinai. And that's when the Hebrew people became a nation and became dedicated to Yahweh as their God. And how this was fulfilled by Christ in his coming, in his first coming, is that 50 days after his resurrection, this is when the Holy Spirit came upon his apostles. And all of the people, when this event happened, all of the people were able to hear the apostles speaking in tongues, and they could understand them and recognize what they said in their own native language. And so the first 4 spring and summer feasts have been fulfilled by Yeshua's coming, as well as the blessing of the Holy Spirit. All right, we'll pick it up, and I'll answer that question on the other side. All right, welcome back, everybody, for final segment. I'm going to address this question. Pale Rider says, Zen, would you respond to those in chat in the listening audience who claim that Jesus is really Lucifer? I mean, that just is so very foolish. I don't know who would actually think. Okay, the confusion is over the Morning Star reference. Yeah, Lucifer is the fake Morning Star. As I explain in my books, he wanted to be as the Most High, like the Most High. And that when, to give you better detail on the story, when it says in the Bible, let there be light, that when this was called out, when this was exclaimed by the Father, that this is when Yeshua, as the light of the world, he was shown to the angels, to the sons of God. And this is also the moment where creation became visible, because it speaks about this in the book of the Bee, how the angels sat in darkness and thought to themselves that they were pre-existent beings. But that when they saw the light, the creation become visible, and they saw the wide expanse of the universe, and saw how massive and how incredible and how majestic it was, they realized that the light that was called forth by the voice of the Father, that this was the Son, and that the voice of the Father that had called forth the Son was their creator. And so they realized that the Father and the Son were one. And here, when the light was called forth, this is when Yeshua was given dominion over the creation. And this is the moment when the angels understood that they were to be servants to the Son. And this is also the moment that iniquity was found within Lucifer, and he, being envious and jealous and wanting to be worshipped like the Son and wanting to have the majesty of the Son, this is when he said, I will exalt myself above the throne of God. I will be like the Most High. All the 7 things where he says, I will this, I will that. I forget exactly. I think I've got it written here real quick. But anyways, I'm not going to look that up. But that's what that's when he said, I will be like the Most High. And that's when he had conceived in his mind the concept of the New World Order, which the New World Order has more to do with diverting worship, changing the calendar system, and also corrupting the feast days and the festivals of the Most High God so that worship could be diverted to him and so that he could lead astray the people of Yahweh. And so, Lucifer is the fake morning star, and Yeshua is the real morning star. Let me pull up this passage real quick. And again, all this goes to Lucifer wanting to be as the Most High, which, in Isaiah chapter 14, the word Lucifer is from the shining one, son of the morning. All right. In Revelation chapter 22, verse 16, it says, I, Jesus, have sent mine angel to testify unto you these things in the churches. I am the root and the offspring of David and the bright and morning star. So Yeshua is the true morning star. But when Lucifer conceived in his mind to steal the worship and to try to overthrow the Son, and this is, the whole reason why there was a war in heaven, and why his angels and those that joined him in rebellion, they tried to overthrow the Son so that they could be as gods themselves. But they were cast out. If you read the book of the secrets of Enoch, it talks about how on the second day they were cast out. That when Lucifer conceived this idea of the New World Order and to steal the worship of the Most High and to try to overthrow the Son, it was Yeshua himself that cast out these rebel angels, that threw them out of the heavens. You can refer to the first book of Adam and Eve, chapter 55. It gives a great, a detailed description of how the Son helped the angels, Michael and the other archangels, helped them to throw Lucifer and these other rebel angels out of the upper heavens. And from that time onward, they have been banned here to the lower heavens and have lived and inhabited this earth. And they were the ones, as I said in my book and as I've talked about in many shows, they were here before humanity. And having been here before humanity, they were the ones that created all of the megalithic structures that we see that are older than modern humanity. There was another question from Kevin, and I thought this was important too, so I'm gonna. And good to see you, Kevin. I missed you that day we were going to do the show, brother. I didn't see you, so. Anyways, we'll catch up another time. He asks, Zen, do you think the earth is much older than most suspect and recreated and replenished after cycles of creation? And maybe these feasts and festivals are to help us keep track of our history. And you're absolutely right. And yes, as I explained in my 6th book, Sons of God, the earth, it was recreated, and there is a gap between Genesis 1 verse 1 and Genesis chapter 1 verse 2, where it describes the earth as being null and void. That it wasn't created that way, it became that way. And the reason it became that way is because the Most High levied a judgment against the fallen angels for trying to create a slave race and for also trying to open up stargates and portals and invite very dark entities into this physical world and dimension as it says in the Emerald Tablets, which the individual that asked me, let me pull this up again. Marlon, when he asked me about, let me read it again. He says, do you know which writings were the first to identify the initial appearance and or origin of demons? You can look to the Emerald Tablets of Thoth for more detail on this, because it was in those texts where it describes how these feathered serpents, these reptilian Nakash-like entities, how they took over the councils of humanity, how they took over rule of humanity. And I'm not going to read that, but I've read it many times on this show, because I want to save enough time to get to these other three feasts and explain how they are going to tie together with the end of days, because this is a huge revelation. And I've not heard anybody else speak of this aspect of it in the way that I reveal in my next book. And so let me go ahead and get to that. I hope that answers your question. But yes, the feasts and the festivals also have to do with maintaining the measurement of time, days, weeks, months, and years, so that we can understand this modern age, these 7,000 years, which includes a 1,000-year millennial reign. How all of modern history, that there will only be 6,000 years, and that we'll have this grand judgment and all of what I'm about to talk to now. So let me go ahead and get into this. All right, so we have these three festivals: Passover or Pesach, unleavened bread, first fruits, the festival of weeks or Shavuot, Yom Teruah, or the Feast of Trumpets, also known as Rosh Hashanah, the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, and the Feast of Tabernacles, or Sukkot. So let me explain these real quick. The Feast of Trumpets is, hold on. Let me pull this up so I can explain this correctly. All right. The fifth feast or festival, Rosh Hashanah, the Feast of Trumpets, is celebrated on the first day of the seventh month, which the seventh month in Hebrew is called Tishri. This occurs during September, October on the Gregorian calendar. And as I said earlier, every new moon day is the first day of the month as well as the first Sabbath. And so this Rosh Hashanah being celebrated on the first day of the month is a new moon day. And during ancient times, it was the duty of the high priest to determine when the new moon occurred. Because if you don't understand what the new moon is, it's different from what science labels as the new moon. Science calls the new moon what the dark moon is, what the phase of the dark moon is, or lunar conjunction, which according to God's calendar is the last phase of the lunar cycle, the phases of the moon. New moon day, according to God's calendar and according to the definition of Enoch, is when the moon becomes 7% alight. It's 7% full, or what is referred to in the book of Enoch as half of a seventh portion. And so when it's this 7% full, the high priest would announce to the other priests, and they would blow the shofar, or what is called the ram's horns. They would sound the shofars across the land, and this would announce the day of the new moon, the first Sabbath, as well as the first day of the lunar month. And this is why this particular festival has linked to and is called the Feast of Trumpets, because it's celebrated on the first day of the month, which all of the new moons are announced with this loud trumpet, this the ram's horn. How this aligns up with the end of days and the return of Yeshua is that, according to Revelation, when the seventh angel sounds, that this is when the rapture, what people refer to as the rapture, when this event will occur. And it says in Revelation, "But in the days of the voice of the seventh angel, when he shall begin to sound, the mystery of God should be finished, as he hath declared to his servants the prophets." In Revelation 11, verse 15, "And the seventh angel sounded, and there were great voices in heaven, saying, The kingdoms of this world are become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever." I'm not going to read the other two passages. You can also find in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 14 through 17, it talks about how, I'll not read the whole thing, but it says, "With a shout and with the voice of the archangel and with the trump of God, and the dead in Christ shall rise first. Then we which are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so shall we ever be with the Lord." In a text called the Revelation of St. John the Theologian, which most people have never heard about, much less read, it says, "And they shall take the ram's horn that lie upon the cloud, and Michael and Gabriel shall go forth out of the heaven, and sound with those horns, as the prophet David foretold, with the voice of a trumpet of a horn, and the voice of the trumpet shall be heard from the one quarter of the world to the other, and from the voice of that trumpet all the earth shall be shaken, as the prophet foretold, and at the voice of the bird every plant shall arise, that is, at the voice of the archangel all the human race shall arise." And so it's my opinion, again, that this particular festival will be fulfilled when Christ comes again, and the seventh angel sounds, and the elect are taken from the earth, so that the wrath of God can then be poured out on the unrighteous, the wicked, those not written into the book of life. And let me quickly go to the other two festivals. The sixth feast or festival is called Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. And this day has to do with reflecting upon one's life, trying to rid oneself of sin, changing, modifying behaviors, actions, the way that one is, ways of being, so that one can be more in alignment with the Father and the Son, so that you can have a better relationship with Christ and with the Father. It's my opinion, most people believe that this particular festival will be fulfilled when we have the millennial reign, but it's my opinion that this particular Day of Atonement lines up and aligns with Christ assuming the judgment seat, and that this is when every knee shall bow, every tongue confess, all the people will be resurrected and brought before Yeshua for the judgment, and there's the wages of sin shall be measured, and if they are righteous, they shall then go forth unto New Jerusalem, If they are not, then they will be cast into Sheol. Which brings me to the final feast, and I should be able to get this done. The seventh feast is the Hebrew called Sukkot, or the Feast of Tabernacles. It's celebrated on the 15th day of the 7th month of Tishri, which again, every 15th day on God's calendar is a Sabbath. And this festival commemorates the wandering, the 40 years that the Hebrews, the Israelites, were in the wilderness, and they had to live in temporary dwellings. Basically, these four walls, and they put these palm leaves above them, and it was real quick, easy to make, and it was this type of dwelling, this kind of tabernacle, which the word Sukkot means. It's a plural of sukkah, and it means booth or tabernacles. And during this festival, the Hebrew Israelites are to go and to stay in these kind of temporary dwellings as commemoration of the wandering of the Israelites in the wilderness during that 40 years. How this links to the fulfillment of the Yeshua's second coming, it's my opinion that this feast and festival will be fulfilled by the descent of New Jerusalem, and after the judgment seat, all of the people, those that are righteous, being allowed to enter into the city of God and taking up residence, and also being given their glorified bodies, because they will then no longer have to we won't be housed in our temporary flesh bodies, nor will we have to live in earthly dwellings, houses made by the hands of humanity in flesh. But we will be living in the residences that the Most High and the Son had created for us. And this is what John chapter 14 alludes to when he said, Yeshua said, "In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you, and if I go, I prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there ye may be also, and whither I go ye know, and the way ye know." And so the fact that Yeshua fulfilled these spring feasts and summer feasts during his first coming is verification that he is the Son of God. And because this is not by accident, I mean, you can't have all of these correlations be accidental. They are absolute confirmation that he is the Son of God, and that he and the Father are one, and that he will come again during Tishri in September. I'm not saying this September, but he will come again at some September, aligned with